Is it okay if I fire you? This is a story of MC that a previous boss had done, but involved me directly, as will be explained. Time frame is early 2000s for reference. In my late high school, early college years, I had a job doing telemarketing work during winter and summer breaks. While it was boiler room cold calling, we primarily were soliciting donations for agencies that had contracted us to do the work, so felt less scuzzy. Think police departments, fire departments, etc. We kept a portion of donations for operating expenses. Everything over a certain threshold went directly to the receiving party. Everybody wins. I enjoyed the job as the scripts were simple. I was allowed to read a book and such between calls, and a number of my friends were also employed there, so we could hang out during lunch breaks. The pay was a decent chunk above minimum wage at that time, so it was a good gig. I also had a knack for it, and at one point was fifth in sales across all their sites they had in operation, second in our building. One summer, while driving to work, my car promptly dies with no warning and I'm left stranded on the road. As you do in this situation back before cell phones for poor college students were a thing, I walk to the nearest house and ask to use the phone. I call my dad, who starts driving to get me, and call my work to let them know I'll be late. My boss says fine and that he will chat with me when I get in. Father shows up with my mother in 2 cars. I take the extra and he begins the arduous process of towing my car back to the house. This involved tying a rope to the front of the car and to the back of his vehicle and crawling back home so he could fix it himself. I've been in that back car, and did not envy my father being in the back car with only 10 feet of space between him and the car my mother was driving, but I'm off to work. I arrive to work, clock in almost an hour after the start of my shift, and am promptly told by the front receptionist that my boss would like to see me in his office. So, I head on back. Beginning details completed. Cue the start of the MC story. My boss and I have always had a good rapport. I'm a good worker, get good reviews, and he and I have some similar interests outside of work we can chat about occasionally. When I arrive in his office, he's shuffling some papers around and has laid out a few documents facing me. As close as I can recall, this is the conversation that followed. Boss: hope everything worked out with the car, glad to have you here. Couple things I need to discuss with you. First of all, as I'm sure you are aware, being more than 30 minutes late to work is considered a Class C violation. 3 classes, from C to A, C being the least egregious, if insufficient time is given prior to the occurrence. This is your first violation, so I'd like to talk to you about what happens next. I'm sweating at this point. I've never even been talked to about being out of order on anything while working here, and getting my first violation scared the heck out of me. So, I'm sitting there, white-faced, and he continues. Boss: no official write-up or anything occurs for a first violation, or even the first few Class C violations, but it is manager's discretion on the punishment depending on past behaviors. Now, you are a good employee and I've put into corporate a few times to give you a raise, but because you only worked during your school breaks, it is denied as you aren't considered full-time. So, the papers I have here are your termination papers and an offer letter I'd like to extend to you to hire you back on again. So, in short, before I file these, I'd like to ask: is it okay if I fire you? So, we go through the process of him firing me, which then allowed him to extend an offer to me to rehire me at roughly a 25% increase in pay, since he could justify to corporate the bump as he was hiring someone with experience. In talking with him, he let me know it was something he occasionally did to the high school and college workers to get around the corporate's policy of not allowing raises to people that didn't work 1,000 plus hours in a year. It was his own way of being maliciously compliant with a policy that didn't allow him to reward some people that he thought deserved it. He had been apparently waiting for me to do something that he could technically fire me for. The way their back-end systems worked, it wouldn't even show up as a break in service, since the firing and hiring happened on the same day, and since I never worked more than the minimum 1,000 hours each year, I didn't have any tenure or anything to be worried about losing. The laugh he and the receptionist had when he walked me back to the front to introduce her to the new employee was enjoyable, and I've had a fun story to tell ever since. TLDR. Boss fires me for minor infraction so he can then rehire me at a higher rate of pay. Edit. Thank you everyone for the comments and awards. I had to Google what the awards meant, as I've never made a post or comment that has had more than a few upvotes in the past. I've been doing my best to keep up with comments and thanking the award people individually, but I know there are many I missed or just didn't have the stamina to keep up with. I also wanted to answer a few commonly asked questions. 1. Why do the fire department and police department need more money? This was more for affiliated agencies and charities. Think the firefighters' boot drive they do every year. They don't keep your change you toss into the boot. It goes to a charitable cause. 2. Did your dad fix the car? What was wrong with it? I'm not a car person, so don't know what was wrong with it, but yes, my dad was able to fix it. 3. Do you keep in touch with the boss? This was close to 20 years ago, and unfortunately, I don't keep in touch with very many people from my hometown including this wonderful man. Last, I had heard, he was still working there 4 to 5 years after I had left, and it was still a great place to work. Many of your comments had me laughing, and I've enjoyed responding to them throughout the day and into the wee hours of the morning last night, and they are still coming in. Thank you all again for this enjoyable experience. I'm glad you had fun with my little retelling of years gone by. Now to the comments. Very cool boss. OP replied. The best of the best. Did you have to repeat a 90-day probation period as a new employee? What a great guy. Good story. OP replied. Still one of my favorite places I've ever worked, and this was closing on 2 decades ago. Which hurts me to say since it means I'm also 2 decades older. Reed's time frame is early 2000s for reference. In my late high school, early college years. Thinks to self, hey, they're about my age, just a couple of years younger. Reads OP's comment calling themself old. Old. Bar. I'm not old, dang it. That did not turn out the way I was expecting and it was excellent. Gotta love bosses like that. OP replied. I enjoy the stories on here that have a happy ending, so I'm glad I could contribute to it. Wish all bosses realized that treating employees well makes them want to work harder for you. I always say, it's the people that really make or break most jobs. What a champion of a boss. I'd love to see/hear more of this in the workplace. Kudos to him. OP replied. He was a genuinely good guy to work for. He knew it wasn't a glamorous job, and the employees were there for a paycheck, but he made it less of a slog of a place to work in. To my understanding, most of the other centers didn't allow you to do other things like reading on the floor between calls as long as you were hitting quotas, but he allowed it. Wouldn't you know it, we were also consistently one of the top performing sites. It makes a hell of a difference to work performance and team morale when you have a boss that has social skills and doesn't act as a standover merchant or a disciplinarian school teacher. This is the nicest MC I've read. OP replied. Thank you. It's a fun story I break out from time to time with colleagues and friends. I've gotten a lot of enjoyment out of this Reddit group, thought I could share something myself. Bosses like this are rare. OP replied. Too rare, unfortunately. Not everyone deals with a bit of power the same way. While some let it go to their head, most others are often yes men, and will just shrug at the asinine company policies, and say sorry, I don't make the rules. And those are the ones that seem to get favored. The twist is that your boss caused your car to die to bring all this to according to his master plan. OP replied. That would be brilliant. Imagine catching him in the act of loosening something in the parking lot, only for him to try and explain that he was doing it to get you fired, but for a good reason. So, you're saying if I cut my brake pipes, I'll get a 25% raise? OP replied. You never know till you try. See you mention. Past performance is never a guarantee of future results. Please do not try this at home. Thanks. I'll report back in a couple of hours. Your boss was awesome. OP replied. He really was. Very fond memories from a place that could have easily just been a boring job I did for extra cash in college. Lol, I was ready to sharpen my pitchfork and fire up my torch until I finished reading your story, hee hee. OP replied. Ha ha. In hindsight, it was pretty obvious I wouldn't be fired for such a minor thing, but at the time I was scared half to death.